Hey everybody, Damien from Bay Ridge DIY here. I built this really cool workbench, rolling workstation in one of my last videos. I wanted to add some more things to it, so I wanted to make a quick video and show you how I added this fold-up table that's going to hold my planer. I'm going to have another one that's going to hold my Craig Foreman on the other side. Just allows me to run pieces from the planer right onto the workbench. I don't need an outfeed table put out then. This doubles up as that, and the Foreman, it's going to help when I'm putting pocket holes in bigger sheets of plywood. We'll do a quick video on this. It's real easy. A few hinges, some feet to stabilize it, and then I added some feet also to the bottom of the tools so we can adjust the height of them when we put them on the table. Stick around, I'll show you how to do it. The first thing I had to do was measure the height of the Craig Foreman. It measures out to be about 7 inches with the feet on, so I put my mark about 8.5 inches down. This will give me room for my adjustable feet and the base that I'm going to mount to it. I use my square to mark both sides for the work surface height. It's just a reference line for now. I'll make another mark in a little bit where my blocks will go. Over at the miter saw, I cut 2 5-inch blocks off of a 2x4 to mount to the side of the table. I'm going to be putting a piece of 3/4 inch birch on the bottom of my work surface. I mark 1.5 inches below the reference line I made earlier. The birch plywood will strengthen the work surface and give me a place to mount the hinges. With a countersink bit, I drill 4 holes in each of the blocks that I cut out earlier. I then mount them to the side of the table with some 2.5 inch multi-purpose construction screws. It's important to countersink the screws on these blocks so that hinges sit flat when you screw them in. The measurement across my workbench is 36 inches. I take a piece of UV-coated birch plywood and cut 1 foot off of the end. My saw does not go out to 36 inches. To best fit my needs, I rip the plywood down to 24 inches. That will be the depth of my table. I use a scrap piece of the birch plywood to strengthen the back and to allow for my hinges to mount. I pre-drill 5 or 6 holes in the back and use a 1.25 inch screw to fasten it to the work surface. I mark the holes for the hinges on the blocks that we just mounted. I do both sides, then I remove the blocks from the table. I didn't figure in that my drill wouldn't fit underneath the other 2x4 to get the screws in straight. Once I have the blocks removed, I mount them down with the 3/4 inch self-tapping screws that came with the hinges. I make sure that the hinge portion is flush to the front of the 2x4. Once the hinges are mounted, I mount the blocks and the hinges back to the side of the work surface. I use a couple scrap pieces of 1/2 inch Baltic birch to keep the work surface away from the workbench. I then support it on the other end with a scrap 2x4. I mark out the holes and put it back on the tabletop to pre-drill. I decided to run 3/4 inch plywood border all the way along the bottom of the work surface. I used my table saw to cut strips down to 3 inches out of some 3/4 inch birch plywood that I had laying around. I then trim these down to size at the miter saw, pre-drill and screw them to the bottom of the work surface with some 1.25 inch screws. With the border added for strength and the holes pre-drilled for the hinges, I set the work surface back down on the blocks and screw the hinges back in. To make the foldaway supports for the work surface, I take a piece of 3/4 inch plywood that's about 24 inches by about 14 inches tall. I draw a line from corner to corner and cut it out with my jigsaw, making 2 triangles. I take the first support and mark where it has to swing past the 2x4 that we mounted the hinges to earlier. With my square, I draw the lines for the area that has to be cut out. With my jigsaw, I cut the rectangle out of the support. I do the same for the other support, knowing that those blocks were the same size. I mount the hinges to the support with the screws that came with. I then realized these were a little bit long, so I mounted a piece of 5/8 Baltic birch to the back of the support to hold the screws. I put the support underneath and marked the top hole so I could pre-drill it and hold it in place while I marked the other holes. This is where it would come in handy to have 3 arms, or at least somebody to help you hold it in place. After it was pre-drilled, I tightened this top screw in place. I made sure that the end of the support was flush to the outside of the work surface. I then used the 1-inch self-tapping screws to mount the rest of the hinges in place. The next step is to add the adjustable feet to level the work surface. I measure in 2.5 inches and measure across 3/8 of an inch to center. I drill a 5/16 hole and insert a threaded foot insert into the top of the plywood. The insert I chose has a 1/4 20 thread on it. I tap it in with a hammer and thread in a stove bolt to act as the leveler. Once I have the leveler in place, I trace a circle around where I want it to sit. I then use a 1/2-inch spade bit to drill a small recess. This will keep the leveler from kicking out, and the support will stay in place. The next step is to add the levelers to the bottom of the Craig Foreman. I use some 3/4 inch plywood for this, cutting it down at the table saw. I then cut these rips down to length at my miter station. I pre-drilled 4 holes in the plastic of the base of the machine. I then used some 3/4 inch screws to screw it to the machine. Next, I drill a 5/16 hole to hold the 1/4 20 threaded insert. I use some 5/8 inch Baltic birch to act as feet on the bottoms. I mark the center and use a spade bit to recess a hole in the block. I use a 3-inch 1/4 20 machinist bolt and a nut, and I mount it to the foot. I then thread all 4 of these to the bottom of the Craig Foreman. To make sure it doesn't slide around on the work surface, I find some 3M grip tape to mount to the feet. Now that everything is complete, the only thing left to do is to level the work surface. I use a straight edge, and I use the levelers that we put earlier to make sure that it is the same height, front and back, on both sides. I make this adjustment 2 or 3 times. I do the same with the Craig Foreman, making sure that it's perfectly flat across the new work surface. Hey, I hope you guys liked this video on the foldaway table build. It's a nice addition to the rolling workstation. It fits the Craig Foreman really well. Folds away when you don't need it anymore. Comes out of the way, but really adds some nice space to the table. You've got to use up all that work surface. If you're anything like me, that's always a mess, so I don't have room for anything on there. The other thing I found when I was building it, it's going to be good for the Bosch router table also. When you're working on it at the height of the workbench, it just was too high, so it will fit nice right down here. It'll be a little more comfortable level, easier on the back. It was a fun build to do, only took me about 2 hours to do with filming. If you guys like our videos, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Check us out on Instagram to see previews to the videos that we're doing. Bay Ridge DIY is our Instagram handle, and check us out on Facebook, Bay Ridge Plywood and Supply. Till the next time, have a good one.